Awesome. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Yeah. Hey everyone, my name is Leona, and I'm going to be presenting our work on data trustees. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, I will explain that in a second. But let's start by having a look at how data sharing is actually happening today. Everybody in this room will likely know that data sharing happens everywhere today, so online, in your car, maybe through digital medical records, and also maybe by your smart home, depending if you have one. And the overarching problem with that is that we don't know exactly what happens to the data from there, and who benefits from the data, who gets access to it, and this is why there's a huge desire for more transparent and privacy-preserving data sharing options. And this is exactly what data trustees are supposed to be. Their high-level idea is basically that instead of you as the data subject sharing your data directly with the data users, and the data from there going just anywhere, you have a trusted institution in the middle, the intermediary as called the data trustee. And the data trustee gets your data instead of the data user directly, and from there the data goes to the data user, but the data trustee only shares your data depending on your personal preferences. And the problem with that is that beyond this high-level idea, this is not really any further defined yet. There has been some mention of the idea in some European legislation, such as the Data Governance Act or the California Consumer Privacy Act, but even those just mention the concept but don't specify it any further, which is exactly where our research tied in, because we wanted to investigate explicitly the acceptance of data trustees, but also what factors influence the acceptance to ultimately be able to design them in a way that aligns with users' expectations about them. So let's have a look at our method. We conducted our study in Germany and the US with a total of 1,800 participants, and we used the so-called vignette study design. We investigated 4 different domains, so medical, automotive data, IoT data, and online data. And for those of you who are not familiar with vignette studies, they are a concept from the social sciences where you just provide a scenario description to the participants and then let them rate the described scenario, and then you can extract information about what factors influence their decision later on. I actually brought a little toy example here. It's just a sentence: the medical data is stored to provide access to research institutions, and you see different factors such as the data type and the way the data is processed, as well as who gets access to it, so the recipient. And these factors can be varied, so it could be the government, or it could be automotive data instead. Our specific vignettes always consisted of 2 parts, the first one being a scenario description, and the second one being the actual description of the data trustee. The scenario description varied depending on the different domain that we investigated, and the data trustee description varied on a total of 8 different factors, which are the following ones. We extracted them from legal literature mostly, because that's where data trustees are primarily discussed at the moment. And concretely, these are the operator of the data trustee, the level of anonymity that it provides, how the data is processed, where the data is stored, who gets access to the data, so the recipient of it, and how this access is regulated, what the benefits for the users of data trustees are, and also how the data trustee is monitored. So let's get to our results. Of course, the most interesting question to us in the beginning was, how likely are users even to agree to using the data trustees? I brought 2 graphs here, one for Germany, one for the US data. And at the bottom, we have the results for those who were very unlikely to very likely using the data trustee at the top. Each of the columns just represents the different domains that we investigated. And unfortunately, we can see that the level of participants who were opposed to the idea is quite high. In fact, we have about 30% in the German sample who selected the lowest possible rating. It was a little bit lower for the US participant, only about a quarter, but still, this is the lowest rating, and we have a lot more who are also opposed to the idea. We do have some positive answers as well, which was overall around 20 to 30% in Germany and around 30 to 40% in the US. And we think this is not entirely surprising because the concept was completely new. Participants didn't know about it prior to doing our study. But still, we have to acknowledge that there's a huge opposition seen in this lower big green part at the bottom. But let's have a look at the factors as well. As a reminder, these were the 8 ones that we investigated, and we found significant influences for 3 of those factors. I will take you through them individually now, so let's start with the anonymity. For anonymity, we had compared raw data, anonymized data, and non-personal data only, and kind of unsurprisingly, we found significantly higher agreement for anonymized and non-personal data being transmitted for the IoT and online data in Germany, and for anonymized data in the medical domain in the US. Always we compared this to the first of those factor levels, in this case the raw data, so anonymized and non-personal data was compared to raw data. In terms of the recipient, we had compared research institutions, businesses, everyone, so basically the general public, and law enforcement agencies. And here we found significantly lower acceptance if law enforcement was given access for medical data. Only in Germany. We were quite surprised that we didn't find more negative opinions for the law enforcement factor level, which wasn't the case, which was a little bit surprising, but we don't have any clear indication as to why that was. We also found significantly lower acceptance for everyone getting access for online data in Germany and for medical data in the US. Lastly, the benefits. Here we had compared just not mentioning any benefits at all in the scenario description, mentioning monetary benefits or personal but non-monetary benefits. And here we had significantly higher acceptance for monetary and personal benefits for medical data in Germany, and for only monetary benefits in the US for medical and automotive data. Again, this was a little surprising that we didn't find more influences, because usually, especially monetary benefits, are kind of handled like a holy grail in trying to convince users to share their data, which is why we were surprised that this was only found for those domains. I also want to have a short word on the factors where we didn't find any influence, which were the operator, the storage location, the way the access is regulated, and also how the data trustee is monitored. This was a little bit interesting because these were highly discussed in the literature usually. So there was a lot of discussion on where the data should be stored, whether it should be stored in the EU or worldwide, and who should be the operator, how this should be regulated. But to the users, this didn't really matter as much, so there seems to be a little bit of a mismatch between what the regulators focus on versus what the users are interested about. I also brought some results from our open answers. We had asked participants about their reason for choosing the rating that they had given to the scenario description, and then coded these results. And it was interesting to see that there seemed to be a difference in the German and the US reasoning in their opinions, because the most frequently answered theme in the German sample was the topic of privacy protection, whereas in the US it was personal benefits. And then the second most frequently mentioned theme was user anonymity, whereas in the US it was the purpose of data collection. And then only on the third level came personal benefits in the German sample, whereas privacy protection came on the third level in the US. So we see quite a clear difference between focusing more on the privacy and anonymity aspect versus focusing more on what do I get out of giving my data to this institution that you're describing to me. Okay, let's summarize what we found. First of all, we saw that the acceptance overall, unfortunately, was rather low, However, it was a little bit higher in the US. They seemed a little more open to the idea overall. There was this clear section of the participants who was completely opposed to the idea, and we don't think that designing the data trustee in any way would convince those participants to ever agree to using a data trustee. Then, in terms of the factors, we think it's important to focus on the level of anonymity that is provided, also who gets access to the data, and making sure that the recipients that are available align with what the users desire, and partially, at least, also the benefits, which don't necessarily have to be monetary. There can be other benefits as well. We saw the significant influence of personal benefits as well. So, yeah. And in terms of the operator, the monitoring, and the storage, which I mentioned was discussed more in the literature, we don't think this is as crucial for users. And lastly, I just spoke about this, it seems that there's a difference between the US and Germany, and maybe if we were to introduce data trustees eventually, focusing on highlighting the benefits and the purpose a little bit more for Americans would work better, and for Germany it's important to highlight how their privacy is protected even when they are using the data trustee. And with that, I'm already at the end of my talk. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
All right. Do we have any questions?
So at the end, I was just thinking about the two populations, USA and Germany, right? Americans were a bunch of weirdos. So yeah, you study us, it's unclear that we generalize to anywhere else in the world because we're weird. Do you think Germany is, like, by studying Germany, are we learning just about Germans, or are we learning more broadly about Europeans? Do you think there's a connection there? Is Germany a good, maybe, proxy, especially for English-speaking people? Because English, German are a little closer than maybe some of the other European languages.
I'm not sure about the language part, but I do think that Germany is probably on the most extreme end in the European population in terms of the focus on privacy and anonymity, and they are probably showing like the opposite ends of the scale here if we compare US and Germany. At least I don't think that we can derive this from the results of this paper because we didn't investigate any other countries in Europe, but from the results of other studies that have investigated different privacy opinions in European countries, I think that Germany is often a little bit more on the extreme side. But I do believe that it's partially representative because, for example, the regulations such as GDPR apply to all European countries. So there's definitely an influence of the prominence of those regulations just in our overall daily lives.
Yeah, so that's maybe these are two really good countries to study then, because they're kind of like an upper bound and a lower
bound
on the privacy issue.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Do we still have a question? Okay, I'll get you them.
Hi, thank you for a great session. That was kind of loud. My apologies. So I thought it was very interesting, the difference in the privacy cultures between the United States and Germany. How do you feel like those privacy cultures translate into the technical communities who are doing that research in those respective countries?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I'm not sure whether I'm very confident in answering this because that would make me make assumptions about the researchers, and I don't really know if there's any specific differences between those, let's say, subpopulations, like researchers as a population overall. But I'm assuming that the overall concept of privacy also has an influence on the researchers and how they approach the research, right? So if the society that you're living in also highlights anonymity, security, and privacy a lot, then this, as a researcher living in this society, will probably also influence your way of researching as well. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question. I'm not sure, what will the different age affect the observation? You collect more than 1,000 participant data, and how about the age, the different age?
We investigated so first of all, our sample was representative for the respective populations. So we did investigate age, but apparently there were no significant influences, except for, I believe, I have to get this from the top of my mind, I think older generation in only one domain, in only one country. So we thought this were to be a artifact of the analysis rather than an actual influential factor. So that's why we didn't focus on the demographic factors in our later analysis anymore. But we did investigate them in the beginning, but we didn't find anything that seemed like an actual result.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I thought young generation will be perform very different. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
anyway.
A short question with a short answer, please.
Yeah, okay. My question is about, you mentioned that some of them expecting the monetary benefits. So in that case, that when someone give you money, in terms of monetary, they are actually gaining a right over anything. Even if this is your right, they are gaining a right on your data. So in that case, do they still expect the anonymity or data privacy when they receive the monetary benefits? Did you observe this through this study?
Can you repeat the last part of your question?
Yes. The users who are expecting the monetary benefits.
Yeah.
Are they still expecting an anonymity or data privacy when they receive the monetary benefits?
Yeah. Well, we didn't explicitly investigate this subpopulation in the results, but there were definitely many users, especially in the open answers, who said both, I want this to be anonymous, or I like that this was anonymous, and I also like that there's monetary benefits. So this wasn't mutually exclusive. And I don't think that the average user would distinguish between this, I'm getting money for it, and that's why I'm giving it away. I think many just think it would be nice to get money for the data and still somehow be in charge of the data and what happens to it, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's thank the speaker again.